All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing on the path of the classless. Which basically means I'm going through all of the classes in Final Fantasy XIV that already exist in D&D 5e, so their version of them is actually a subclass for a class. Quick reminder, if you are enjoying this, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All of those are really important to letting other people be able to see this. And if you're wondering why this is so incredibly late, it's because I've already recorded this video once on Thursday, and OBS decided it wanted to change my mic input, and I didn't notice it until I was uploading the video and realized there was no audio. So, yes, this is take 2. I still have another video I have to get recorded for the actual next video that's due out. So, ugh. Anyway, let's dive into this. So, today we're going to be covering the monk. Now, for anyone that has ever watched any of the D&D deep dives, you know I am a monk main. And by that, I mean, in D&D, that is my favorite class. The reason D&D did a deep dive exists is because I'd had a conversation with someone actually playing a druid. And both druids and monks in 5th edition are classes that are kind of deceptive. And if you don't understand the class, you're going to think it's either underpowered or just not well designed or things like that, because what you think it should be able to do and what it's actually designed to do are very different things. So I started D&D Deep Dive specifically with the monk because the monk, I believe, is one of the easiest classes to play poorly and one of the hardest classes to really master in 5th edition. But if you do master it, you're an essential part of your party. And it has everything to do with the fact that the monk is a type of class that really isn't emphasized in 5th edition. In 4th edition, they actually had 4 different kind of flavors or styles of classes. You had leaders, which were your healers. All leaders had an ability to heal in some way. You had strikers, which were your damage dealers. They were designed to do a lot of damage and do it very, very quickly. You had defenders, who were really built around the idea of being able to get in front of the party and take damage for the party to protect other members. They generally had the ability to mark targets, to kind of force targets to attack them, or to punish targets that didn't attack them. And then finally, you had what were called controllers, which were designed to quite literally control the battlefield. Now, in 5th edition, you still have defenders or tanks, fighters, paladins, barbarians. All of those classes can make very good kind of buff kind of tanks. Clerics can be very tanky. There's even the war wizard. For the wizard can actually be a pretty powerful frontline fighter. So you still have that. Healers is obvious. Clerics everyone thinks of as the healer. Druids can actually fill that role really, really well, where they keep people up with a bunch of different healing spells. Bards can do it. Some subclasses of sorcerers and warlocks can do it pretty well. And then damage. Damage is what everybody thinks of when they're looking at classes, to the point where I've actually seen quite a few discussions where the entirety of the focus of the class is how much damage can it do. And they will boil the entirety of a class down to the numbers themselves, which is a very poor way to examine a tabletop RPG class. So everybody thinks about that. But control is not something that people think about a ton in 5th edition, because it takes a better understanding of the game than just knowing how to play your character. And that's what the monk excels at. I talk about the action economy a lot in 5th edition. It's because in 5th edition, it is incredibly difficult to gain actions in combat. The game is built around the idea, and the balance of the game is built around the idea that actions are kind of set in stone. The number of actions you have is limited and doesn't really fluctuate by much. And so getting the most out of every single one of those actions is very, very essential. And that's why abilities like haste, spells like haste that give you an additional action, or action surge for the fighter, is such an incredible ability, because it actually changes the action economy. Oh, I just got something in my eye. That was lovely. Wow, that hurt. So they're really, really important. Now, when you look at the monk, a lot of people see the monk and they go, wow, well, they can attack 3 times right at level 1. That's more attacks than any other class. This has got to be a powerhouse of a class. But they only do a d4 on their damage rolls. That number gets higher as you go further along, but it maxes out at a d10, which is still pretty good. And if they eventually get another attack, so they can do 4 attacks per turn. That's the same number as fighters. So they should be a pretty powerful damage dealer. They're not. They're not built to do incredible amounts of damage. Can you do a lot of damage as a monk? If you build them in a very specific way and you get very, very lucky, yes, there can be rounds of combat where you do a significant amount of damage. But overall, the monk isn't built to do damage. The monk in 5th edition is meant to control the action economy, and they do it in a number of ways. Things like the patient defense makes all attacks against you have disadvantage. That you can do as a bonus action is really, really useful. Especially at lower levels, if you run in, punch 2 guys with your action, burn a key point, and use patient defense, you've just gone up and punched them. They're going to try and attack you back, but they're going to waste their turn because they have disadvantage on their attack roll, and monks have a decently high AC. It's nothing compared to like a fighter in plate mail or a paladin or anything like that. But they can take a fair amount of, they can deflect a fair amount of the damage, and it just gets better the higher their levels get. Stunning Strike is their kind of epitome of this, where they literally can go up and just go pop, and then remove someone from initiative for a round, which is really, really useful, and it takes away so many actions away from the enemy. And there's so many other ways that they can manipulate the action economy, whether it's by using their stunning strikes correctly, whether it's by making enemies waste their actions through patient defense, whether it's catching catching missile weapons and things like that, throwing them back. There's so many different things they can do to control the action economy. And if you focus on that, you're going to have a lot of fun as a monk. And if you focus on damage, you're not going to have a lot of fun as a monk. Now, this contrasts really, really heavily with the monk in Final Fantasy XIV. The monk in Final Fantasy XIV is a damage dealer. It is a DPS class. It is meant to do damage. And after the most recent restructure of the class, it actually does that relatively well. The nice thing about Final Fantasy XIV in general is there really aren't like quote-unquote broken classes like you have in WoW fairly regularly, where some specializations of classes are just not viable for endgame content. There really isn't that situation in Final Fantasy XIV. However, for a little while, for a little over an expansion, for effectively most of Shadowbringers, the monk just really wasn't working well. And so they redesigned it And now it works relatively well. There's still some things that I would like to see to change about it, but overall, it's a pretty fun class. Monk was my first class I played, or Pugilist actually was the first class that I played in Final Fantasy XIV. I really, really enjoy the monk. I recently, and by recently I mean within the past 6 months, maxed out my monk and had a lot of fun playing with all the different things. So the key thing that the Way of Rhalgr monk is going to have to kind of deal with is the idea of taking a DPS class and translating it into a control-based class. So that's the big hurdle that they're going to have to overcome here, and we're just going to have to see if it works or not. So, starting at 3rd level, when you pick this class, you get Greased Lightning. Now, Greased Lightning is a defining feature of the monk in Final Fantasy XIV, and it's recently been changed. Originally, Greased Lightning was, in Final Fantasy XIV, you have combos. Generally, there are 3 different abilities that you do one, then the next, then the next, and each time you combo it, it gets additional benefits if you are doing it as part of a combo. And the last ability you used in the combo, the 3rd ability, would give you a stack of Greased Lightning, which would lower all of your cooldowns by a set amount. And it started off that you could only have, I think it's like 1 or 2 stacks. And by the time you got to level 80, you could have 4 stacks of Greased Lightning on. So in Final Fantasy XIV, the monk is known to be the fastest, quote-unquote, class. And by fastest, I mean their global cooldown is lower than every other class. So they get to push their buttons faster. They've changed it now so that Greased Lightning is just a trait as opposed to something that you have to activate by getting combos done, because in every single boss fight, what would happen is the boss would go away for a second, and Greased Lightning only lasts for like 12 seconds. So if the boss was gone for 20 seconds, you lost all of that, and your monk had to start back at 0, basically, and build back up to their full DPS potential. And they had to put all these abilities in to make that stop, and it really wasn't fun to play. So yeah, that's what Greased Lightning is supposed to be emulating in 5th edition, is this fact that monks are faster. The way that it does it, if you use Flurry of Blows and successfully attack your target with both of the unarmed attacks, you may make an attack roll for 1 more unarmed attack with double the proficiency bonus. So effectively, Greased Lightning gives you another attack, which means at level 3, when you get this class, you could attack 4 times. You can attack more than any other class in the game, other than a 20th level fighter. When you or an 11th level dual wielding fighter also would get 4 attacks. However, once you get to level 5 and you get extra attack, the monk can now attack 5 times per turn, provided that when they use their Flurry of Blow, they make both their attacks. Which means this monk can attack more than any other class other than a 20th level dual wielding fighter. And that is the defining feature of the fighter, is that to the 20th level, is that they get more attacks than anyone else. So already this is worrying me slightly, because this is effectively giving the monk the ability to act like a fighter. Which, again, it makes sense from the idea that Greased Lightning in Final Fantasy XIV is meant to be it basically means that they get to attack more than any other class in the game. So it kind of translates here. Because Flurry of Blows has to be unarmed strikes, it does mean that this is not nearly as versatile as the fighter's attacks, because the fighter, no matter which flavor of fighter you are, the fighter can use magic weapons. The fighter can use spells that enhance the weapons that they already have. The fighter can also generally has abilities that add on to their attacks. So as much as it sounds like it might be slightly unbalancing, I don't think it's horrible. I don't know why they add the double the proficiency bonus. The fact that you're getting a 5th attack is more than enough, and it requires you to land both of your flurry of blows in order to get it. You don't really need the double the proficiency bonus. You're going to be making that attack. If you made the other 2 attacks, you're going to make the 5th attack. There's no real reason for that other than to make it even better when it doesn't need to be. And due to the fact that this is the second time we're recording this, I also have to remember I did forget my slight refresher on how 5th edition class design works. In 5th edition, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, each class has what we call the defining features. These are things that either are unique to the class or aren't actually unique, but the class gets them earlier than other classes or is able to use them in unique ways that other classes can't. In order for something to be a defining feature, it has to show up in the first to 2 levels. The monk's defining features are its martial arts. Effectively, it has unarmed attacks, so it can attack without weapons or with what are monk weapons, which is a specific grouping of weapons, basically simple weapons and then these short sword, simple melee weapons, and the I think short sword, and basically all of those weapons and their unarmed strikes do a D4 plus their dexterity modifier, and that number gets higher and higher as they level up. So the other defining feature that they get relatively early, they also get unarmored movement, which is basically they get extra movement, so they can move faster than any other class. And the final defining feature is ki. They have a limited resource called ki, and they can use it for a bunch of different things. One of the most common things to use it for is what's called flurry of blows. That's what we're talking about here. When they take an attack action, and they attack with either an unarmed strike or a monk weapon, they can burn a ki point to use their bonus action to make 2 unarmed strikes. So they attack a lot. They also get a couple other things for keys, and then at fifth level, they get effectively an upgrade to their defining feature, which is Stunning Strike, which allows them to literally stun creatures. And it is as much as it's not a defining feature, it is something that's supposed to be almost exclusive to the monk by design. The designers of 5th edition have said stun is a monk ability. And we designed it specifically to be unique to the monk or be very special to the monk. So going back to Grease Lightning, that's effectively Grease Lightning is kind of upgrading your Flurry of Blows. Which again, the issue with it is at low levels, it's going to be overpowered. At like level 3, this monk is going to feel super, super powerful because it can make 5 attacks in a turn. Like it's going to do crazy amounts. Then at 4th level, it's going to go, At 5th level, it's going to pop again. So it's like, wow, now I have 5 attacks. Oh, wow, this is amazing. But starting at about 6th level, it's going to taper off. And by about 8th level, it's not going to be worth it. Because, again, everyone else at this point is using magic items that add additional things to their attack and damage rolls and things. And the monks simply can't. They have to use their unarmed attacks for Flurry of Blows. It's how the class is built. So as much as it sounds really cool, and it is at 3rd level, it's really not going to do a ton beyond like mid-tier 2. So yeah. Like I said, the only issue I have with it is doesn't need double the proficiency bonus. There's no reason, because all that's doing is making an almost guaranteed hit turn into a guaranteed hit. Like you will never miss that 5th one. And if it's never going to miss, why make them roll? Like just let them make another attack or double the damage on one of their attacks or something. Like there's no reason to make them roll if it's always going to hit. And especially when you get to high levels, double your proficiency bonus at 19 is plus 12. Add that on to the +5 you already have from your dexterity. You have a +17 for your attack roll. That's nuts. So yeah. Going to 6th level, you get Embodied Element. After completing a short or long rest, you may select an element, and this is a typo, where it says which to meditate on, and that's grammatically it's incorrect. It should say after completing a short or long rest, you may select an element on which to meditate. Which to meditate on is a prepositional phrase that's incorrect because on is modifying meditate, but it's coming after it, despite the fact that you have the which before it. So yeah, it should say on which to meditate, not which to meditate on. That's just grammatically incorrect. Sorry, grammar, fun. And gain the following benefits. So you have 3 different things, which this is another thing that's taken directly from Final Fantasy XIV. Monks effectively have 3 different stances. They have a fire stance, an earth stance, and a wind stance. The fire stance just gives them a flat bonus to damage. The earth stance reduces damage they take. The wind stance increases their walk speed. That's really it. 99% of the time when you're playing a monk, you are only ever using the fire stance because again, it's a DPS class, so anything that's going to give you additional DPS you want to use. There's some very, very rare instances where you will switch to the wind stance if you really need to get out of the way of or you have a boss that's really, really going crazy with area effects and you have to constantly keep moving around. Yeah. And then Body of Earth, I almost never used Body of Earth as a monk. Now, it might just be I was a bad monk, but it was extremely rare that I ever used Body of Earth. So let's see what they do. So Fist of Fire. You may change the damage type of your unarmed strikes to fire. Your unarmed strikes deal additional damage equal to your wisdom ability modifier as bonus damage. As an action, you may expend a number of key points up to the number of creatures in a 15-foot cone in front of you. You make an unarmed strike against a number of creatures equal to the key points used. So there's a lot to talk about here. First things first, the ability to change your unarmed strikes from bludgeoning damage into fire damage sounds really useful. And at low levels, it actually is. One of the first things you will come up against that will really start hurting your party is you will start dealing with monsters that have resistance to piercing, bludgeoning, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons. Being able to change your damage type into literally anything but those 3 damage types is unbelievably useful because it means you don't need a magic weapon to be able to hurt these creatures. A lot of people think being able to change your damage type to an elemental type is going to be really useful for dealing with weaknesses. In 5th edition, if a creature is weak against a particular damage type or has vulnerability to a particular damage type, they will take double the amount of damage of that damage type. Can be really, really useful. However, the amount of creatures that actually have vulnerability in 5th edition is unbelievably small. It is a smaller number than I believe the number of creatures that are immune to stun, which is a incredibly small number. Specifically so monks are not put into a situation where one of their kind of unique traits is useless. So you really don't get to use vulnerability very much at all. But you deal with resistance a lot. However, at 6th level, monks get key empowered strikes, which turns all of their attacks with all of their unarmed strikes are magical for the purpose of weakness and resistance. So, yeah, the ability to change your fist attacks into fire really doesn't do much by 6th level. You already have gotten around most of that. It's going to be extremely rare that you're going to find a creature that's actually weak against fire. So the only time you would probably ever use that is for role-playing purposes, if you want to be a fiery, punchy monk, and that's about it. So that in itself isn't really all that useful. Additional strikes, additional damage equal to your wisdom ability modifier is nice. It is only your unarmed strikes. So something that a lot of monks do is they will use monk weapons for their attack rolls, and then they will use unarmed strike for all of their for all their bonus action stuff because they have to. This does mean you are kind of as long as you're using Fist of Fire, you are basically saying you are not going to use any magic items whatsoever. Monks can use magic items, they just don't get as much out of them as like a fighter would, because all their offhand attacks, all their bonus action attacks generally have to be unarmed strikes. That's just how the class is built. This is effectively going, no, you're never going to use that, because if you do, you're not going to get the benefit out of Fist of Fire. So yeah. Finally, you have the really, really complicated way of saying you can attack everything within a 15-foot cone and burn a key point for each one you attack. Overall, that is a massive, massive waste of key. Because getting enough creatures into a 15-foot cone is difficult. Technically, if you had a perfect world where you had enemies lined up perfectly, you can hit 6 people with a 15-foot cone. You hit 1 person, then 2 people, then 3 people. That is a 15-foot cone full. So the most you could ever get from this is 6 attacks. You already get 5 attacks if you land both of your flurry of blows. And to get those 5 attacks, you need to spend 1 key point. If you were to get all of your enemies lined up correctly, you would be able to make 6 attacks. So 1 additional attack, which is nice, but it would cost you 6 times the number of key points. At 6th level, that is your entire key point pool in a single action. Another thing about it is it's as an action. In order to use your offhand strike, monks, because they're martial arts, if they take the attack action as a bonus action, they can just get a free unarmed strike. No key points required. They just get to do it. In order to use Flurry of Blows, you have to take the attack action. With this, you can't actually take the attack action because you are taking a different action. So you cannot get your extra unarmed strike. You cannot Flurry of Blows with this. And because most enemies are not going to line up perfectly, in general, in a 15-foot cone, you're normally only going to get maybe 3 people in it. So for an action, you can trade making 3 attacks without burning any key points, or, and that's just what you can do every single turn, no key points, or you can spend 3 key points to make 3 attack rolls. So you have a choice between don't spend any resources at all and make 3 attacks, or spend half the resources you could currently have to make the same 3 attacks. Only these 3 attacks have to be against creatures that are in a very specific position when you make the attacks, whereas your other attacks you can move in between attacks. So that last action of Fist of Fire is a complete waste of your key points. There is never a situation where you're going to get a benefit from using that. It is always going to be a situation where you are losing valuable key points to do something that's not useful. And then adding on to that, you're burning these key points instead of using them for things like Patient Defense or things like Stunning Strike, where they will actually affect the action economy, which is what the monk does, where this is just extra attacks that aren't really what the monk is suited for. So yes, that's Fists of Fire. Body of Earth is the next one. So damage from bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical means is reduced by your wisdom modifier. As a reaction, you may expend 1 key point to transfer half the damage a creature within 5 feet of you to yourself. Your resistance applies to this damage. So again, this sounds kind of useful. First of all, it gives you a way to use your reaction. Using your reaction is always nice. Action economy again. Being able to use your reaction gives your team additional actions. So that's nice. However, you don't get resistance to the damage. You reduce the damage by your wisdom modifier, which isn't that useful, really. And it has to be from non-magical means. There's not... Most enemies do not use magical weapons. So any physical attacks you're getting, it's not going to matter that it says non-magical means or not. It just works that way. However... if you are dealing, there are spells that do bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing damage. And according to this, you would take full damage from those spells, even though you have this ability. So it's one thing that's less than great, but we can work around that. However, because it's just your wisdom ability modifier, at 6th level, your wisdom ability modifier is going to be either 2 or 3, depending on how you've built your character. Most monks will never have a plus 4 there that low. Eventually, you want to max both your dexterity and wisdom, but at this low level, you never have it. So that means, let's say an enemy comes up to you and, hits you, does, 17 damage. It now only does 15 damage. It's really not that beneficial at all. It does become more beneficial when you start dealing with creatures that do multi-attack, because that's 2 or 3 off of every single attack. So if they do 3 attacks, and it's 3 off of each of those attacks, so that's 9 damage gone. That's a little bit better. But even that is just not that useful. Now, when we go for the reaction aspect, because it takes your reaction, that means you can only do this once. You have to be right next to someone, which isn't something that happens with monks a ton. Again, they're hypermobile, so they're generally running around and, off doing their own thing. They don't tend to end their turns right next to another character. But if you know you have this ability, maybe you will. It makes perfect sense. However, we've already talked about multi-attack is really the only time this is actually going to be a real benefit. Because taking 3 damage off of a, fireball that just did 33 damage doesn't really mean much. With this, it's only going to reduce a single attack. You cannot get both. If a creature multi-attacks your ally, you're only going to be able to protect them from 1 attack. And you're only going to... they're going to take half the damage. You're going to take half the damage minus 3. It's still not that beneficial. You're not really doing much of anything that's helping anyone, and you're wasting your reaction, which could be used for an opportunity attack, or quite a few monks get a bunch of other abilities as they level up that they can use their reaction for. Shadow monks specifically, it's just a 17th level, get the ability where if an enemy, I believe if an enemy misses an attack while they're within 5 feet of a monk, the monk can just bop them in the nose. And use the reaction to do it. So there are other much more useful uses for your reaction. And other things like catching arrows requires your reaction. Things like that. There's so many better uses of your reaction than taking a single attack from an ally and reducing the damage slightly. So another one that it sounds good, but the actual execution just doesn't work. And finally, we have Legs of Wind. You may change your damage type of your unarmed strikes to thunder. Your movement speed is increased by 10 feet. As an action, you may spend 2 key points to cast the Jump, Long Strider, or spend 4 key points to cast the Levitate spell on yourself. So, interesting fact, there actually is a key to spell slot formula that's in the player's handbook. The Way of the 4 Elements monk actually gets a bunch of abilities that just let them cast spells. And basically, the way it works is for any leveled spell you would cast using key points, you just add an additional key point to it. So a first level spell costs 2 key points. A second level spell costs 3. A third level spell costs 4, etc., etc. Jump and Long Strider are first level spells, so being able to cast them at 2 key points follows that rule pretty well. Levitate is a second level spell that costs 4 key points. That is more expensive than it should be. And when they're this limited, things like the Shadow Monk gets the ability to cast both Silence and Darkness, which are second level spells, for just 2 key points. Because those are the only spells they get to cast. And they are very, very situational. I've already talked about monks are already hypermobile. In general, monks max out their speed at 60 feet, an additional 30 feet, which turns into about 60 feet for most races. Moving 60 feet in a turn is really the most you will ever need to move in any combat ever. The entire battlefield for most combats is generally about 60 feet wide. It just doesn't really get that much bigger than that. So giving them another 10 feet of speed, yeah, it's nice. It fits into the kind of hypermobility thing, but you get diminishing returns. And then the ability to cast the jump, the Long Strider. They already have a way to increase their jumps. Patient Defense allows them to double their jump distance, which is effectively what jump does. So they don't need that. Long Strider just gives them an additional 10 feet of speed. So again, not that useful. Levitate doesn't do anything. Quite literally, all Levitate does is it raises a creature 20 feet in the air. And they're only allowed to cast a spell on themselves. Monks are melee attackers. And when the Levitate spell is cast on you, you cannot move laterally. You can only move up and down 20 feet a turn. So, casting Levitate on a monk is completely pointless. The monk cannot attack enemies from 20 feet in the air. They are a melee class. They have to be. There are certain classes that Levitate is super useful. Things like wizards with Levitate, super great. You turn into a flying wizard turret. It's super awesome. Or maybe rangers that Levitate. It's another thing where they can just rain down damage and nothing can really attack them. Those are all super great. A monk with Levitate can't do shit. It's just a completely wasted ability. So yeah, that's Embodied Element, and nothing here is beneficial. First things first, again, the monk is not designed to be a damage dealer. So trying to turn it into a damage dealing class through a subclass doesn't work. It's been tried many times before. It was one of the reasons why the 4 Elements monk is as weak as it is as far as monk classes are concerned, because it does try to turn it to a little bit more of an offensive monk. And even then, there were quite a few elemental disciplines that still allowed it to do that action economy manipulation. Like Water Whip allows you to knock someone prone, which can mess around with their ability to move around. And it also gives any melee attackers again near them advantage on attack rolls. So action economy bending, things like that. And the other thing that makes this such a limited ability is you can only change these embodied elements at a short or a long rest. So with things like Body of Earth, okay, yeah, maybe I want to have a little bit more defense against multi-attack using enemies. You have to predict during a short rest that you are going to come up against enemies that use multi-attack for that to be useful at all. And there just isn't a way to do that. Like if, for other classes, like sometimes you can choose something on a short rest, like you can change your resistance or something. Well, if you're going to be in a mausoleum and you know you're going to be dealing with undead, changing your resistance to necrotic damage makes sense, because most undead have some sort of necrotic damage that they do. However, There are undead that use single attacks. There are undead that use spells. There are undead that use multi-attacks. And there's no way to predict which one you're ever going to deal with. So something like Body of Earth just isn't useful. Because when it might be useful, you have to make the decision to use it long before you know if it's going to be useful at all. Being able to make the decision in the moment would make it significantly more useful. So my suggestions on how to modify this. Let's start with Fist of Fire. First things first, to change your damage type to fire. Sure, let's go with that. We can treat that effectively as a role-playing option because, again, mechanically, it's really not going to give you that much of a benefit. As far as the rest of the things here, again, the monk is not really about doing damage. So even though Fist of Fire is supposed to be kind of the damage state, in order for it to fit with the monk, we need something that's going to be able to give them the ability to manipulate the action economy. So what if for Fist of Fire, when you make an unarmed strike, you can burn a key point to set someone on fire? They would take, at the beginning of their turn, they would take your martial art die of fire damage, and they take that for a minute, or when someone uses an action to put the fire out. This brings in that idea of action kind of manipulation, because now if they want to get rid of this additional damage, they have to burn an action to do it. Now, they can do it or someone else can do it. So it does give the enemy a little bit more leeway. The other thing that's nice about this is taking damage every turn. A single martial arts style, like when you get it to max level, it's only a d10 of damage at the beginning of the turn. It's not a massive amount. But any concentration effects, every single time you take damage, you have to make a concentration check. Spellcasters in general, their actions are very, very valuable because that action could turn into a 9th level spell, depending on how powerful the spellcaster is. So, and the big limiting factor in 5th edition for Magic is concentration spells. The most powerful spells require concentration to get the most benefit out of them. So, being able to run up to an enemy, pop them in the face, and set them ablaze is really, really useful, and force them every round at the beginning of their turn to make a concentration check on whatever they're concentrating. That is an incredibly useful thing. It will incentivize them to either use their own action or use one of the other actions of their team members to put the flames out. And again, that's what you want as a monk. You want to be forcing them to use their actions less efficiently. You want to make their actions worth less. So that would be a perfect way to do that. For Body of Earth, let's get rid of reducing it by the Wisdom modifier, because again, it's such a tiny amount, and it's really only ever going to be useful for it's only ever going to be useful for multi-attacks. They have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. Ignore the from non-magical means. We don't really need it. And again, if they're going to be choosing Body of Earth over Fist of Fire, there needs to be a reason why. So just give them resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. And then for their reaction, instead of being able to split a single attack, as a reaction, when a creature, when an ally within 5 feet of you is hit, or when an ally within 5 feet of you takes damage, you can use your reaction to bind your spirits together. Whenever damage is rolled, you split that damage in half. Half of it goes to the monk and his resistance applies. The other half goes to your ally. And it lasts until the end of the current turn. So effectively what this means is somebody casts a spell, you're going to get the full benefit of that. Somebody does multi-attack, which is where this really, really shines. You're going to get the full benefit of it because it lasts until the end of that turn. Not the round, just that turn. So it gives you a good use for your reaction, a good use to burn a key point to do that because it's still going to cost a key point. And it actually has a benefit. There's a good reason to use Body of Earth. Finally, for Legs of Wind. Changing the damage safe to Thunder. Again, that's perfectly fine. Again, it's going to be a role-playing kind of thing, but it's cool. Increased speed by to 10 feet again, isn't really going to be that useful. However, one of the things you can use your key for as a monk is called Step of the Wind, which allows you to either disengage or dash as a bonus action, and it requires a key point to use. If you have Legs of Wind on, you can use Step of the Wind without burning a key point. The other thing that's nice about Step of the Wind is when you use Step of the Wind, your jump distance is doubled. So when you have Legs of Wind on, you can just dash or disengage as a bonus action for free. And when you use either of those two abilities, your jump distance is doubled. Now, to make these more useful and to add some limitations, instead of them just always being active because you choose it whenever you wake up, instead, let's give this a limited number of uses. Let's say 2 uses per short rest. So monks are already tied to short rest because that's how they get their key points back. So you can use Embodied Element, the ability itself, twice. Not each different stance twice, but the ability itself you can use twice between short rests. When you activate it, you use your bonus action to activate one of these 3 stances, and they last for a minute. This allows you to be in the moment using the stance that's going to be most useful for you in that particular moment. It's going to add a lot more tactical use of these abilities. It's not going to be, oh, I have to use one of them, so I'll have this one on for right now. It's not going to force you to predict what you're going to be fighting, halfway through the day. And by giving them 2 uses instead of just 1 use, we don't run into the one and done issue where people just will never use them. So it's not overly powerful, but it's useful enough that you actually get to use them and have a lot of fun with them. So that would be how I would fix Embodied Elements. Because right now, none of the things are useful in any way, shape, or form. But with the suggestions I made, this turns into a really interesting, fun class to play. Going to 11th level, you get Forbidden Chakra. Forbidden Chakra is another thing that's taken directly from Final Fantasy XIV. Monks, every class gets a gauge ability in Final Fantasy XIV. Generally, you get it around like level 50-ish. And what it is you will get a gauge on screen, and it fills up with some sort of resource, and then you find a way to spend that resource. Every single class has got them. The monk has, I think they're called key points. I'm not 100% certain. I can't remember what they're called. I think of them as key points because I played D&D before I played Final Fantasy XIV. So, but basically, they can store up to 5 of these. They get them in various ways. And then when they have 5 of them, they can use this thing called Forbidden Chakra, which is just a super powerful uppercut, massive amount of damage. That's what Forbidden Chakra is in the game. This is effectively going to be simulating that. One thing I do like about it is it actually ties it to your Embodied Element, which is basically whichever stance you have on, Forbidden Chakra gives you an additional benefit to that stance, lets you do something magical with it. So I like that. So, what it says, as an action, you are able to release dangerous amounts of ki through your chakras. This release of ki takes different forms depending on your current embodied elements. With Fist of Fire, when Fist of Fire is active, you may use Howling Fist. While Body of Earth is active, you may use Elixir Field, and while Legs of Wind is active, you may use Tornado Kick. You spend 2 key points and may spend up to 3 additional key points to use Forbidden Chakra. For each extra key point, add an extra damage die to the effect. So again, Forbidden Chakra is damage dealing on the monk, which isn't supposed to be a damage dealer. You can probably guess how well this is going to work out. But let's look and see what it is. So, first thing is Howling Fist. This is the one that requires Fists of Fire. This is the fire technique. You release an incredible amount of ki through your fist, causing a stream of ki to burst from the ground before you. All creatures in a 40-foot line. This makes a dex save against your ki save DC, taking 3d8 force damage on a failure, half as much on a success. Okay, at 11th level, your martial art die is a d8. So 3d8s is the exact same amount of damage you would make for not spending any ki whatsoever. Again, you get 2 attacks plus a bonus extra attack. The difference being, with the 2 attacks and the bonus action attack, you add your dexterity modifier to each one of those, which by 11th level is probably, bare minimum, it's a 3 or a 4. You may have it as a 5 already, depending on how you've built your monk. So bare minimum, that is either 9 or 12 additional damage that you get doing just regular attacks with no key points versus doing Howling Fist. If you burn additional key points, going up to 3, 4, 5, you can add additional d8s to it. Still not that useful. Now, you can hit multiple targets, which is really nice, but it's a 40-foot line, and getting more than 2 enemies into a line is very, very hard. It's the reason why wizards use Fireball a lot more than Lightning Bolt. They both do, I believe, either the same damage or within a couple dice of the same damage. But wizards almost never use Lightning Bolt. Wizards almost always use Fireball because a 20-foot radius sphere is a lot easier to get enemies in than a line ever. So while, yes, you might be able to hit multiple enemies with this, the likelihood is you're going to hit either 2 or 3. 3 is a good day. 2 is generally what you're going to do. So for 2 key points, you're reducing the amount of damage you do, but you're spreading out against 2 characters. Or, because you're already hypermobile, you can just punch them, not burn any key points, and just do more damage. So, as you can see, it's just not useful. And then, that's all based on if it's successful. If they make their saves, you're actually doing less damage than you would against a single target because they're taking half damage. So overall, Howling Fist, just not useful. The other thing that's not great about it is that's your action, which means you can't get your extra attack, you can't get Flurry of Blows, and you can't use Greased Lightning. The kind of defining 3rd level ability of this subclass you can't use with Howling Fist. That's an issue. Elixir Field. All creatures in a 10-foot sphere around you make a Constitution saving throw against your key save DC, taking 3d6 force damage on a failure, or half as much on a success. Elixir Field is the Body of Earth. That is the defensive one. I have no idea why the defensive one is a really weak offensive attack. The other thing is, as it's written, it says all creatures in a 10-foot sphere. Not a 10-foot radius sphere, but a sphere that is 10 feet, which means a 10-foot wide sphere, or a 5-foot radius sphere, meaning Elixir Field will only affect creatures that are within 5 feet of you. It's all creatures, so you might be hitting your allies with this, and you do less damage with Elixir Field than you would do with your normal attack. Now, again, spheres are a lot easier to get enemies in than lines, so you have a better chance of doing it. But overall, this is still, and again, if they make their saves, you are just trading key points for less damage. It's just not worth anything. And again, this is the defensive stance. Why in the world in the defensive stance are you doing damage? Why wouldn't it be something that would improve your defenses in some way? This is fighting against its own ability here. Finally, you have Tornado Kick. This is the Legs of the Wind, the super fast movement stance. Make an unarmed strike against a target dealing 3d10 bludgeoning damage. If you hit, you may use your Flurry of Blows feature, and both attacks have advantage. So that, in and of itself, is a cool ability. First things first, does more damage than you normally would. So that is actually getting a benefit out of burning your key points. So first things first, that's useful. Second, you can use Flurry of Blows with it. That's even nicer. Now, what you need to remember is the attack action, which is free, doesn't cost any key points. At 11th level is 3d8 per attack. So 3d8 plus 3, let's say, if you have just a 16 dexterity. So 3d8 plus 3, meaning this tornado kick is replacing 6d8 plus 6 damage. So you are doing less damage with tornado kick than you would with your regular just attack action. So even then, it's not really beneficial unless you burn extra key points. The D10 is nice. I mean, 3d8, the most you can get is 24 out of that. 3d10, the most you can get is 30. 68, however, on average, you're going to be doing 30 damage. Just rolling the average on all the dice, the average on a d8 roll is a 5. So on average, you're going to be doing 30 damage plus 6. You're going to be doing 36 damage, or you're trading it to burn 2 key points to do 3d10 damage. It's not a great trade. However, being able to use your Flurry of Blows and have both Flurry of Blows have advantage does change things a lot. It requires you to burn an extra key point, which isn't the absolute best thing. It's making this a less useful trade-off, but having advantage on both of those attacks is a nice thing. It's not quite nice enough for this to be useful, but because it's an unarmed strike, you can still use Stunning Strike. You still get to make your Flurry of Blows. So it's better than the other two. I don't understand why it's on Legs of Wind, other than the fact that Tornado deals with wind. But overall, it's just not that useful. So how would we change this to make this useful? Well, first things first, switching Tornado Kick, like Howling Fist, simply is not useful. So let's just take Howling Fist and the actual ability Howling Fist, throw it away. Let's keep the name because that's a thing that's actually in Final Fantasy XIV. But take the actual ability that it gives and just throw it away. What we can do, take Tornado Kick and put that for what you can do with Fist of Fire. Increase the damage from 3d10 to 4d10 bludgeoning damage so that it actually is worth the trade-off, and then keep the Flurry of Blows with advantage. Because that means you're going to be able to do Grease Lightning if it hits. It gives you, that benefit of advantage. It means if you have a much better chance to crit and things like that. So just increase the damage to... I would almost say, instead of going for 4d10, because again, you're replacing 2 attack actions. No, because there are benefits to having a single attack that does more damage as opposed to 2 smaller attacks that do less damage. Especially if you're dealing with resistances and things like that. So, 4d10 bludgeoning damage and your Flurry of Blows, if you use it, have advantage. That I'm good with. That's cool. So, for Elixir Field, which is the defensive one, instead of giving them an attack that's really not worth burning the key points, let's turn this into in a 10 all allies in a 10-foot radius of the monk gain the benefits of the Body of Earth resistance until the end of the monk's next turn. So this literally gives all of your allies within 10 feet of you resistance to basically physical damage. That is an actual useful thing to do. No need to increase it or anything. Like I'm gonna get rid of. You can spend additional key points here because you don't need to spend additional key points. You have enough uses for your key points. You don't need to be using 5 key points in a single ability. It's one of the reasons why the 4 Elements monk is so underpowered, because they're constantly going through 5 and 6 key points in a single action. It's just not worth it. For Fist of Fire, you have access to Tornado Kick, which increases to 4d10 bludgeoning damage and gives you Flurry of Blows with advantage. For Body of Earth, you get you basically get to give your resistance to all allies, only allies, within to the 10 feet of you until the end of your next turn. And finally, for Tornado Kick, just to really stick with the idea of action economy, and because this isn't currently an ability that exists in 5th edition, for Tornado Kick, if you burn 2 key points, all opportunity attacks against you until the end of your current turn have disadvantage, and anytime you leave the attack range of an enemy, they have to use their reaction to make an opportunity attack. This effectively means your monk, because they're already in Legs of Wind, they're already fast, they can use their bonus action to dash, meaning they can go even faster. They can get a ton of movement, and now all they have to do is run past enemies, and you get to burn their reaction. Which, for really, really powerful, melee-based enemies, it might be nice because they're rolling it with disadvantage, and so they might miss. However, for spellcasters, they're generally not going to have a good opportunity attack, and there's a lot of spells that are very useful that use reactions. The shield spell, counter spell, having your monk be able to burn 2 key points and steal the reactions from your enemies, even if they get hit, is a massive thing. It is a really, really good use of action economy control. It's not something that currently exists in 5th edition, and it would turn Legs of Wind into an insanely useful ability. Legs of Wind is the one ability that I could, the one embodied element I could see monks using outside of combat. This gives you a huge benefit to using it inside of combat. It would be phenomenally useful. Again, doesn't mean you're going to be doing tons of damage or anything, but that's not what the monk is built for. It is built to control the action economy, and that would be the single most useful action economy ability in the game. And I think it would be amazing and fun to play. Finally, at 17th level, you get Perfect Balance. As a bonus action, you enter a state of perfect balance for 1 minute. When you make an attack roll, after the die result is shown, but not before the attack has been confirmed, there aren't confirming attacks. You don't confirm attacks in 5th edition. That's an idea from Pathfinder and somewhat house ruled into the 3rd edition. But I believe what they're talking about is... no, they don't. Like, the whole thing doesn't make sense. When you make an attack roll, after the die result is shown, but not before the attack has been confirmed. So after the die result is shown, and after the attack has been confirmed, which isn't a thing, but I'm assuming after you find out if it hits or misses, you may expend a number of key points up to your Wisdom modifier, adding that number to your attack and damage rolls. You may switch your selected element from your Embodied Element feature as a bonus action. You must then finish a long rest to use Perfect Balance again. So, Perfect Balance, first things first, is a one-and-done ability. I'm not a huge fan of them because people just don't use them. So if it's going to be a one-and-done ability, it needs to be super useful. Being able to burn key points to increase your attack is kind of useful. To increase your damage, it's pointless. But there are some times when you really, really need an attack to hit. You need to be able to get a stunning strike to go off. So I need this to happen. That's kind of useful. For a one-and-done ability, it's not useful enough. With the changes we made to Embodied Elements, being able to change it as a bonus action is not that big a deal. because you can already turn it on as a bonus action, so there's no reason for that. So to change perfect balance with the changes we already have in there, for it to be a one and done ability, because I think this might be a useful one and done ability. At 17th level, as a bonus action, you enter a state of perfect balance for 1 minute. While in this perfect balance, you have access to the benefits of all 3 embodied elements. So you can use all of the embodied elements abilities. You can use all of the forbidden chakras. You can't use them simultaneously. Like, it still takes an action to do tornado kick, or it takes an action to do elixir field. For fist of fire, you still have to burn a key point when you make an unarmed strike to set them on fire. Or you have to burn a key point and your reaction to use the Body of Earth ability. So it's not that you get to do all of it all at the same time, but you have access to all 3 abilities for a full minute. So it just infinitely expands the number of things that you can do. I think as a one and done ability, it's a really good one. It gives you a lot of choices. It's not massively overpowered, but there's always going to be a situation where you go, you know what? This is worth burning my one and done ability. So yeah. Final thoughts. As it is written, this monk doesn't work because it is trying to take a control class and turn it into a damage dealing class by use of a subclass. And it doesn't work that way. The monk is not built to be a damage dealing class, and this doesn't do enough to turn it into one. However, if we ignore the idea of monk being a quote unquote DPS and let the monk in 5th edition be what it is, which is an action economy control specialist, and we make some modifications, this can turn into a really, really fun class to play. Grease Lightning is fine. The only thing I will change about it is get rid of the double the proficiency bonus. You don't need it. Getting an additional attack is a useful enough ability. Embodied Elements, again, you can use Embodied Elements 2 times per short rest. Not 2 for each element, but you can invoke these elements twice. So you can use 2 fire, or 1 fire and 1 earth, or 1 wind and 1 fire. And then you have to take a short rest to get more. Fists of Fire. Your unarmed strikes still can be changed to fire. That's just roleplay. Your unarmed strikes deal additional damage equal to your wisdom modifier. That's perfectly fine. But whenever you hit a target with an unarmed strike, you can burn a key point to set them on fire, which makes them take your martial art damage die damage at the start of their turn for a minute. And the only way they can stop that is by using either they spending an action or one of their allies spending an action to put the fire out. For Body of Earth, you just get resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical means. And then as a reaction, you can tie yourself to an ally when they take damage for the rest of the current enemy's turn. And you basically split the damage with the ally for the rest of the attacks of that enemy. And your resistance applies to the damage that hits you. Finally, Legs of Wind, your movement speed is increased by 10 feet, and as long as Legs of Wind is active, you can use the Step of the Wind key action without burning key points. So you get to use that for free. Again, all of the embodied elements are activated by a bonus action. They all last a minute. For Forbidden Chakra, we're changing things up. Forbidden Chakra gives you a different thing depending on the element you're embodying. For the fire element, we're using Tornado Kick, and the only thing we're changing is it's 4d10 bludgeoning damage instead of 3d10. For Body of Earth, we still have Elixir Field, but Elixir Field changes into all allies within 10 feet of you gain the benefit of your Body of Earth resistance until the end of your next turn. And then finally, for Legs of the Wind, we can call it Howling Fist just to keep with the naming things correct. But basically, for 2 key points, all Opportunity attacks against you until the end of your current turn are made with disadvantage. And anytime you leave the attack range of an enemy, they have to use their reaction to make an opportunity attack against you. And then finally, perfect balance. You get you can basically turn in all 3 elements for a minute. It is a one and done ability. It does not affect your number of embodied elements. It's a completely different track thing. So that's it. Yeah, like I said, I think with those changes, this would be a massively fun monk to play. It would be super, super cool. It fits with the idea of the Final Fantasy XIV monk by getting the Grease Lightning in there, by having those different stances and letting them be able to effectively stance dance, which was the big thing with monks. But it fits much, much better with how a 5th edition monk is designed to play. So anyway, that did me all for me today. As always, remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on in the comments down below. First things first, what do you think of the changes to this? Do you think this could be a much more fun class that way? Or, on the opposite thing, do you think it's possible to turn the monk into a damage dealing class? Do you think they just didn't go far enough? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. I'll see you guys in the next time, all right? Bye-bye.